Hello everyone, it's Shane Kanto, your Wasteland reviewer, and I'm here to review the new Netflix series, The Crew. And this is a new sitcom starring Kevin James from creator Jeff Lowell. Jeff Lowell, known for The Ranch, also on Netflix, which is a sitcom. And I grew up a lot watching King of Queens. It was one of my favorite sitcoms. I was an overweight kid. I was obese. And I definitely related with Kevin James' character, except I wasn't a doofus. But I also really didn't have any relationships or anything like that. And he did pretty well for himself, right? And Kevin James definitely has a very specific sense of humor. It's a very dad humor. And that sense of humor, that persona that Kevin James has, continues into this show, The Crew. And The Crew is about a NASCAR pit crew dealing with the fact that their boss, played by Bruce McGill, is retiring and putting his daughter, who's from Silicon Valley, in charge. And of course, you get a lot of, this is a big businesswoman, she has these new ideas, she wants them to eat like organic things and have early meetings instead of being all cool and relaxed and showing up at the track. And you get a lot of that kind of workplace humor, workplace conflict that you've seen this coming from different sides of the track kind of idea in the workplace. And this show doesn't do anything necessarily fresh or interesting with it. You've seen these kinds of jokes before. One thing you don't see is a whole lot of, like, this is set in a sport. You don't see a whole lot of sitcoms set during, like, a sport. And to be fair, I think this show does a fine job of capturing the expectations of, like, car racing, stuff like that. It brings in some potentially interesting ideas of, like, it's a big, like, the racer that they have in the show, who's played by Freddie Stroma, he plays Jake. He is an idiot. And this young woman, this daughter who takes over, played by Jillian Mueller, who's Catherine, wants to replace him with a young woman, and focusing on, it deals with those kinds of ideas of, like, bringing a woman into, like, a man sport and stuff like that. And it doesn't do anything necessarily interesting or new with it. It does throw in some fresh little twists on what otherwise is a sitcom with a bunch of quirky characters doing a bunch of dad humor, because Kevin James knows his dad humor. And that's very much the show. And Kevin James is charismatic. He comes in, he does his thing. And if you like his humor, you're definitely going to have some laughs out of here. This definitely feels like a sitcom where it's just like, you know, you're telegraphing there's a joke coming, there's going to be a pause, so the studio audience is like, oh! And that happens quite a bit. And some of the dialogue feels really forced. It's like, I don't think somebody would throw a joke right in there, but, you know, that's what the point of the show is, trying to get many laughs as possible out of people. And probably the most earnest thing that I appreciate about this show is the relationship between Kevin, who's the pit crew leader, and Beth, played by Sarah Stiles, who is they're really close, and they have an endearing relationship. And they totally should be together, but they're not together. And that becomes one of the biggest storylines throughout the show. That, and Kevin dealing with Catherine taking over, and they're at each other's throats, and they're at odds, and they're trying to sabotage each other, and that tension. And throughout the show, Kevin's character can be a little unlikable. He does things that are being like a jerk. And it's like, you probably shouldn't be doing stuff like that. And he can definitely be full of himself, but also insecure. And I feel like Kevin James plays that exactly how it needs to be. The last episode, which really starts leaning into this relationship between Kevin and Beth, I appreciated that. It also spends a bunch of time between Catherine and Jake going off on their own little side thing, which is like, this is the first time they're spending a considerable amount of time together, and they start forcing something, and I'm just like, no, why? Why are you trying to go in that direction? And it felt forced, and it felt out of place. But in general, I think this show, this first season, it's 10 episodes. The episodes are like 20 to 25 minutes long, and some close to 30, it's a sitcom, it's full of dad humor, and some lowbrow humor where I think this is really leaning into. But like, if this is your brand of humor and you can enjoy this workplace comedy, I think you might find some enjoyment out of The Crew. If you're looking for something a little more sophisticated, a little more highbrow, The Crew's definitely not it. You know, it's a Kevin James show, so probably isn't your thing. But those are my thoughts on The Crew. Let me know what you think, and let's talk some TV. But thank you as always for tuning in and supporting your Wasteland reviewer.